Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Reopening a Building Post-COVID, brought to you by Domain Computer Services. I'm Lisa Figatner, Director of Member Programs and Services for New Jersey Business and Industry Association. With us today is Christina Hanthi of SJP Properties. A few housekeeping matters before we get started. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be emailed to you tomorrow, along with the PowerPoint for today's presentation. So be on the lookout for those. If you just can't wait, you can download them right now from the Handouts tab. But I'd also like to draw your attention to the Questions tab. Tina would be happy to take your questions, so get them in as soon as they come to you. One last thing, it's definitely been getting better, but we've still been noticing some people having audio-visual issues with the GoToWebinar platform as they struggle to keep up with all the extra video conferencing going on right now. So if you have any trouble viewing or hearing during the presentation, don't forget you will automatically be receiving a recording within 24 hours. So you could just sign out and watch the recording and you won't miss a thing. So now let's get started. Tina, take us away.
Hello, thank you for that lovely introduction. So for those of you who might not be familiar with SJP Properties, we are a developer of high-end commercial and luxury residential properties in New Jersey and New York City. We've built more build-to-suit projects than all of our competitors combined, and we have about 25 million square feet between New York and New Jersey that is proudly under the SJP banner. We've also developed over 2 billion square feet of ground up construction with institutional partners. I'm the Director of Asset Management. I handle property management, business development, and client relationships for our partners. And we have been talking about nothing other than reoccupancy for the last 8 weeks. So when we found out about the opportunity to help you guys out, we just jumped on board. What can I tell you about how we handled the crisis in the beginning? We were on top of a business continuity plan right away. And I think a lot of small businesses probably struggled with that because they weren't prepared and didn't have an emergency plan. Were you able to work from home? Did you have Wi-Fi access? Did you have remote access to all of your company server files? All of that was a learning process for many small businesses. And at SJP Properties, we had put all of that into place already. So within one day, we had the entire operation working remotely. We also started practicing site separation very early on. I think it was March 9th, even before the NBA closed down, that we separated our teams so that each platform of services would be able to operate and wouldn't expose anybody else to possible infection from the coronavirus. So I haven't seen my president or my chief operating officer or my second in command for the last 12 weeks. We just reopened our offices for essential personnel only this week. We have less than 10–15% of people coming in. That being said, we can get started with the reopening, but let me give you some numbers right up front. So 2%, 10%, 50%, and 100%. And what do those numbers mean? Right now, we only have 2% occupancy in our buildings throughout our 6 million square foot portfolio. And I think that is consistent with what my peers have been saying and what other operators are showing. 10% of employees are expected back into the workplace in phase 1 of the reentry. So while most buildings have been open and have never shut down, employers are only going to be having back about 10 to 15% of their staff when we enter stage 4 of New Jersey's roadmap back. 50% of employees are expected back by January 2021. So it sounds dire. I think other small businesses are probably more apt to bring their entire crews back than some of our larger tenants. And the 100% figure is 100% of your employees want to be reassured and have their fears alleviated that you have taken every precaution to have them back and welcome them back into your offices and make their environment safe. So let me share my screen with you and we will get started with the talking points. Can you guys see my screen? Lisa, or can you confirm?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, good. Let me. All right, so most of you are familiar with New Jersey's road back plan. We have just entered stage 2. Stage 2 started on June 15th, and we had the stores reopen. I said stores reopening. We had outdoor dining and extended retail. Pickup at curbside was expanded. Certain museums and libraries were opened. Face coverings required, and all that. We won't be entering stage 3 probably until early July, mid-July. It looks like each stage is taking about 30 days. But again, I can't foresee into the future. I don't know what the governor has in store. I do know that I had my first meal out last night at a nice outdoor dining facility in Hunterdon County, and it was fantastic. So I'm sure a lot of you can sympathize and appreciate how wonderful that was. So I'm gonna fast forward and talk about critical in-office staff. Who goes back? In the beginning, you could see my staff and I preparing at one of our properties in Newark. So stage 3 allows everybody, let me go back up, sorry. Stage 3 allows expanded dining, of course, critical in-office work, limited entertainment, and I believe they're gonna raise that to 1,000 people by July, bars with limited capacity and expanded personal care. So on the 22nd, you are going to see salons reopen. There's going to be non-contact sports. There's going to be massage parlors, tattoo parlors, all of that reopens on the 22nd, which is going to bring a lot more people out and about than we saw. And then when we enter the part for critical in-office work, that is when you're going to have to consider and invite the employees back that are essential to your business operations. So I go back to preparing your office space. You have essential personnel. Who is your essential personnel? It's not up to me to define who essential is. You can go to the New Jersey website, covid19.nj.gov. New York also has a website, covid19.ny.gov, and they will detail who they consider essential. You're going to see staggered teams. You're going to see different shifts. Some people may expand their entrance into the building. Instead of having it 7 to 9 a.m., they may have it 7 to 10 a.m. They may allow people to work different hours. You'll see phased occupancy. You might see 10% of the staff starting to come back as essential. Then come September, you might see 25% of the staff come back. I can tell you in dealing with most of our major tenants who include, Ernst & Young and Marsh and Walmart e-commerce, a lot of those companies are considering a Labor Day start. Other organizations are going to start on June 22nd. So it all matters. I think it all depends upon what is right for you as the employer. Employees who found themselves unproductive at home, those might be the people you invite back first. People who are struggling with their children running around in the back room, people who don't have a proper setup, they might not have dual screens, they might do a lot of spreadsheets, they might feel more comfortable in an office environment, extending the invitation to those who are out and about doing business development, who need to interface with other people or use some of your infrastructure or equipment back at the office. And then those, of course, who will continue to work from home. And of course, Governor Murphy would like everybody to continue working from home. But those who will continue to work from home should be those who have compromised health systems, those who may be pregnant, and those who you may not be able to make the appropriate accommodations for to come back into the office. What we also did at SJP Properties is we created a re-occupancy plan, which highlights the best practices across the board. So we were very lucky. We used a different approach, I think, than a lot of our friends out there in the market. We went to the CDC websites. We went to BOMA. We went to respected trade organizations across the board. We used our broad band of connections, such as architects, attorneys, engineers, brokerage firms. And we took all that information, created a library, and then we created a matrix from which we chose what we felt were the right best practices for SJP properties. Because outside of what the governor recommends or what other states are doing, I think it has to be right for you too as an owner operator. So when we created this best practice guidebook for our tenants, we also have a section that is customized for each property because every property is different. So you couldn't have just one best practices that's good for every single property across the board. You have some properties in urban areas, some properties with different types of lobbies, elevators, the ingress and egress is different. Some have loading docks, some don't. Some have cafeterias, some have fitness centers, some don't. So we made sure each of our guidebooks was customized for each of our properties. And that took a lot of work. Obviously, we had to work with all of our managers and all of our engineers to ensure that the information was accurate. So for those of you who have not done so yet, I think it's very important to start thinking about what those guidelines will be for your own employees to re-enter the workplace. Do you need to change your HR policies? Do you need to modify the signage that's in your office? Do you need to find out if you have the appropriate equipment in your bathrooms so that you have high touch areas eliminated or easier to utilize? So one of the things I've seen, and this will make some people laugh, one of the things I've seen is handwritten signage on doors and windows. I was in a Dunkin' Donuts yesterday picking up donuts for my team, and there were handwritten arrows on the floor. So this is an opportunity for you to really make your own company stand out. And if you can, there's a lot of good signage that's available out there. You can go to FedEx, you can go to Home Depot, you can go online to Amazon. We customized our own because we wanted it to be standardized across our entire portfolio, but you can find it easily available online. So having the appropriate signage in place is part of the roadmap back in New Jersey. Part of the One New Jersey Pledge, which you've likely seen Governor Murphy put out, is making sure that you properly inform the people coming back into your office. So I'll leave this up for a few more seconds and I'll go through each sign. Of course, we have the reminder of, doing the 5, as they called it, washing your hands, making sure you don't cough on anybody, trying to avoid touching your face. And I have found out in the last 3 months that I touch my face so much more than the average person. Staying 6 feet apart, and obviously if you're sick or showing signs of a fever, staying home. You may find that you need to change the density in your elevators. So what we have is elevator signage in all of our lobbies, where in buildings where we have elevators, decreasing it by 50%. And why? Because we want to make sure people feel safe entering the elevator. And if you normally had 6 people in there, we're going to reduce it to 3. If there were normally 4, we're going to reduce it to 2. In some instances in New York City, we have some elevators that will only have 1 passenger. So think about that in terms of when people come back into the workplace. Is that going to cause a disruption in your lobby? Will you have people queuing up trying to get up to their floors? And how are you going to deal with that? Are you going to have tension barriers? Are you going to have a security officer guiding people in the right direction? We also have stickers in the elevators on the floor showing where you can and cannot stand, or where you should. It's really just a suggestion, but I think it's important too as a visual reminder that you're doing everything you can to keep people safe as they enter your building. We have face covering required as you enter the building on every door. We have reminders to wash your hands in all of the restrooms throughout the properties, and we have reminders to practice social distancing. That's just a little bit of the signage that we've utilized. We do have more signs, but I just wanted to give a snapshot so you got an idea. We also created site maps for all of our tenants so that they could see what we were doing in terms of a landlord as an owner to welcome back the employees as they come into the offices. So these floor plans show the layout of where all of those signs are going to be placed. Shows where the stickers were going to be placed. Some of those were stickers that I showed you on the signage before, and also where our stands and our disinfectant stations were going to go. Are they going to be at the front entrance? Are they going to be near the elevators? Are they going to be outside near the bathrooms? So making sure you have purchased the correct disinfectant stations, additional garbage cans that don't require anybody to touch a top before you put something into it, wipe stations. That's going to be very important for you if you haven't already placed those orders. I can tell you a lot of managers placed orders as early as mid-March or late March and still are waiting for a certain product to come in. I know wipes are very hard to come by, and disinfectant stands. You can get the disinfectant all you want and the pump bottles, but those are easily removed from an office space and can be stolen. And we've found that having an actual physical station is better to keep the product on hand. So taking the guesswork, I'm looking at my title right here. We want to make sure that everybody understands this is what we're doing to make sure that you stay safe when you come back into our building. And you will need to do the same for your own employees. So you're going to see reduced density in the common areas, whether you have a cafeteria, whether you have shared conference space, whether you have a fitness center. You can see in this picture, this is a cafeteria in Newark, and you can see that they have spacing every 6 feet to ensure that when people enter the cafeteria, they're not going to be bumping into one another. They're changing the flow into the cafeteria. You walk in one door and out another. You can't walk in and out the same door. And you're going to see this across the board. So if you had a meeting room that normally accommodated 300 people, it's likely going to be reduced to 150 until further notice. In terms of food, you're going to see removal of buffets. You're going to see prepackaged food options increase. You may see that some building managers or employers don't allow food deliveries at all. In fact, we have one tenant who used to do buffet food for their entire staff of 150 every Friday, and now they have to find a restaurant that will do it in single servings because they don't want people to be exposed to having a buffet meal where everybody's walking around without masks on and coughing on each other's food. So health and wellness. This is one of the biggest questions that we get, and I can tell you what SJP is doing. We've implemented a well check app. So you basically do a self-check. We have an app that was created just for our company. You go in, you answer 5 questions. Those questions, have you been out of the country? Are you feeling sick? Is anybody in your household sick? Do you have a fever? We also distributed thermometers and pulse oximeters to all of our employees so that they knew that we cared about them, number 1, and number 2, so that they can check their temperature every day, or if they feel short of breath, that they can actually check and make sure that their oxygen levels are right up there. So they answer all the questions in the WellCheck app, they press send, and it says, okay, you're okay to enter the building. If you don't do that and we don't get the response, you can't come into the building. It's as simple as that. And it's also our way of doing contact tracing. Where was the person that day? We have a lot of managers who travel from site to site, engineers that travel from site to site. So we wanted to be careful and ensure that everybody's being protected to the best of our ability. You'll find a lot of information on the websites, and I include one website here, and you'll obviously get a copy of this after today with other websites. You're going to see an increased janitorial presence in the buildings if you haven't already. So a lot of the concerns have been, how are you going to keep the space clean? High touch surface areas such as turnstiles, elevator buttons, doors entering the buildings, doors entering the stalls to the bathrooms. All of that is going to be addressed by your porter. You're going to see an increased porter presence throughout buildings. You're going to see the placement of the disinfectant stations like we talked about before. Contact tracing is going to be important. So if we are notified of a tenant who may have had a positive exposure, SJP Properties would find out where that person was located in the building, who they came in contact with, in our lobby, in our common areas, and we would be responsible for cleaning our common areas. And then the tenant themselves would be responsible for taking care of the cleaning with the walls in. Also, you may see change traffic at your elevator. So you might see dedicated turnstiles to an in and an out section. You might see arrows on the floor. That's it for the lobby, I think. So protocols for a new normal, I think I touched on almost everything that you're going to see here. Recommended employee health checks, at least a self-check. Face coverings are going to be required in our common areas. So let's talk about the restaurant visit I had last night. At the restaurant, I wore a mask, my husband wore a mask. We walked into the restaurant, we sat down. When you were at the table, you were permitted to remove your mask, and the waiters and waitresses and the owners of the restaurant wore a mask the entire time. However, they didn't have signage up as you entered the courtyard outside requiring that all customers wear a face covering. So what happened is they got a lot of people come into the restaurant who weren't wearing masks and didn't have a mask. And so then the other people at the restaurant were getting concerned because these people were just walking about, milling about, and invading their space. So I think face coverings are going to be super important to alleviate employees' fears about getting exposed unnecessarily. So we're going to have a welcome concierge in our buildings, but that's only in our urban buildings. So some of you may have smaller locations and not have a need for something like that. But wherever we have a security guard, we are also going to have somebody who is skilled in our new normal, these best practices, and they'll be able to guide somebody who's entering the building, through the new ingress and egress patterns, explain to them what the procedures are with face coverings, offer face coverings if they don't have them, make sure they get to the tenant space that they're visiting, etc. We talked about designated entry and exit points. We didn't talk about loading docks quite so much. You might find that mail delivery and, as I said, food delivery may be disrupted to the building, at least in the early days of re-entry. You will definitely see that packages we won't allow mail carriers into our buildings to just traverse through and deliver willy-nilly now. They will deliver to the loading dock and they will be placed in a queuing or a staging area. And then the tenants will be responsible to come down and retrieve those packages to protect strangers from entering the building, and also protect our guests and tenants in the building. Secure access, we talked about making sure that your building is limited to those essential personnel as they're coming back in. So right now, for example, our buildings in Hoboken along the waterfront, they're secured on evening hours scheduled. So the front doors are not open to somebody who is a non-employee. You can't just walk into our buildings. They are restricted to the people who have card access. That is it. And that's how it'll be at least until September, I think. Visitor registration may change. If you have a security officer or a concierge that uses a lot of paper or pens or login sheets, you may find that there will be less hand touching. You'll see cough and sneeze guards at the security desks and the concierge desks to ensure people don't have a direct cough or direct spray on top of them. So you might find that people are using, digital registration processes more than the hard book or pen and paper. Vertical transportation, we talked about the elevators. We didn't talk about the stairwells. So in some instances, especially in our urban areas, we're going to designate an upstairs and a downstairs during rush hour traffic, meaning in the morning hours when people are coming into the building, to enable people who don't want to take the elevator to have a safe place where they can walk up and not worry about somebody walking down and invading their airspace. Obviously, in the event of an emergency, you can use any stairwell that you want. Restrooms, it's kind of been a point of contention. And I know a lot of people are taking very strong measures to X off or mark off individual stalls or urinals in the restrooms. And I can tell you that at SJP Properties, we're not doing that. We think that we're going to let the adults be the adults that they are. And if they enter the bathroom and see that there's people waiting or they don't feel comfortable staying, they'll leave and they'll come back in when they are ready. Restrooms is also a high touch surface area issue. So do you have automatic dispensers for soap, automatic paper dispensers? Do you have automatic faucets? Do you have automatic flushers? These are all things that people have been scrambling to replace over the last 3 months. So if you haven't already done that, you certainly want to look into doing it and then getting that order in as soon as possible, because it could take 3 to 4 weeks to even find out when they're on the ship over here. Amenity spaces we spoke about, courier carriers we spoke about, mail and deliveries and loading dock. Some people may want to have disclosure forms or some sort of form, before somebody enters their building. So I know that we have such a form for our own guests, and I know the tenants that we're dealing with have their own policy and procedures for guests. So I think making sure that we recognize that, we've provided consulting and recommended best practices to our tenants. We've communicated with their heads of real estate and their HR departments, but we haven't dictated to them how they should run their business, nor how they may choose to welcome their employees back. We can only give them our best practices and allow them to either take our information and run with it, or utilize that information and then create their own policies. Sorry, I just moved past the screen. So every company has its own approach, and every company is going to have its own day that they welcome back their staff. We're fortunate in terms of the properties that we have in our portfolio that we already have destination dispatch elevators, so you don't need to touch the buttons all the time. We already have our systems our systems have already been adjusted to make sure we take in maximum outside air. In Hoboken, we have the outside air being brought in from the rooftops, and making sure we have it done 1 to 4 times an hour, making sure it's turning over as often as possible. You've heard a lot about MERV filters or HEPA filters, making sure you have the maximum efficiency filter, minimum efficiency filters for your building. Raise it a level. If you have an 8, can you go to a 13? If you have a 9, can you go to a 13? Will it affect your HVAC system and the way it operates? Only your engineers can answer that for you. Janitorial concerns. So does your building have a day porter or a matron to handle the high surface cleaning? A lot of our tenants have contacted us directly and asked us to clean their spaces for them. Or if they have a positive case, they've asked us to come in and clean our space. We can refer them to the janitorial provider to do an extra service that's above the scope of work that's in their current lease. But in some instances, some tenants are requiring things that are not in their scope of work, and they may require additional bodies or additional hours during the course of the week. So I think it's important to familiarize yourself with the terms of your own lease, and also speak candidly with your team and your facilities manager to find out that information. So does your current scope of work that's in your lease meet your needs? I think that's also important for those of you who are a tenant in a building. Review your lease terms and speak to your landlord about what that scope of work is. Can it be modified or adjusted? And if not, what is the additional cost to improve it? All right, we talked about base coverings, talked about conference rooms and meeting room, buffet lines, cafeteria seating. We've touched on that. Again, in cafeterias, you're going to see a big change. They may actually not even reopen for some period of time in the beginning phases of the roadmap back. You may find that the cafeteria remains closed for a long period of time, or some companies may opt to reopen them at 25% occupancy, then phase it up to 50% occupancy, and it might not hit 100% occupancy for the whole entire year. I think I've touched on almost everything. Lisa, do you have any questions for me, or?
Yes, so we do. We have questions. Thank you very much. That was
I could keep going, but I'm sure there's questions there.
I definitely have questions, so thank you, because that was a lot of good information. I probably have enough questions for you, but if anybody else has something to ask, go back into the chat box and send it in. So your first question, once an employer does reopen, what are the return to work policies and procedures that employers should consider putting into place?
So what are the return to work policies and procedures that the employer should consider putting into place? Well, number one, making certain that the person coming back into the office feels comfortable coming back in, making sure that you make the appropriate accommodations, making sure that you require face coverings at a minimum. A lot of companies are requiring face coverings and gloves. And what is your policy going to be with face coverings? Are you going to require face coverings at all times? Like, for example, I'm in my office today. I'm allowed to take my face mask off at my desk or when I'm eating food. Or when I come within 6 feet of, I have to put it back on when I come within 6 feet of somebody. We have another tenant who expressed concern about people wearing their own face masks. They are adamant about supplying the face mask to the employee because they don't want the person coming in with, you know, cartoons or offensive words or things on the face mask that wouldn't be appropriate to the general public. A lot of people really don't think about those things. So what is your face mask policy going to be? Does it have to be worn 100% of the time? What is your well-check policy going to be? Are you going to have somebody sitting at the front office taking temperatures of employees, or are you going to make it a self-administered option? And then what is going to be your policy for informing people of a positive case? You know, in our instance, if we hear of a positive case in our own office with one of our own employees, you know, you can't tell somebody who was positive or the name of that person, but you can say, oh, they took elevator A and they came in contact with these 3 people, and we are going to contact trace and clean, and these 3 people are all going to be quarantined until they test negative for the test. So it's a unique and challenging situation, and you may need to take a look at your HR policies as well to see if you need to make any modifications for people.
Okay, thank you. Does lifting the restrictions mean it is safe to have my business open and welcome my employees back?
So does lifting the, what was that again?
Does lifting the restrictions mean that it is safe to have my business open and welcome my employees back?
I think every company is different, and every company is going to need to make that decision for themselves. I was on a panel last week with Dr. Eric Handler of St. Barnabas and Justine Abrams from Genova Burns, and the general consensus was, as long as you're taking the appropriate measures and washing your hands and wearing face coverings when you're in a dense environment, doing things that we probably always should have been doing, it's safe for your employee to come back. I think people are anxious to get back to normal. I know that that's the general consensus in our own offices, and that what we've been finding is people are happy to be back and they feel comfortable being back.
Okay. Are critical office staff allowed to go back to the office during phase 2, or do they need to wait till phase 3?
Anybody who is considered an essential worker was allowed to be working this whole time, right? A critical essential worker. So in BOMA, for example, you know, real estate professionals, managers, engineers, janitors, porters, we've all been considered essential this whole time. So we have been in the office. So, but also administrators who get the mail, people who have to accept deliveries, you know, the plumber, the electrician, I can't tell you if you're essential or not. So I think you might need to defer to your HR or labor attorney there, but I think that if you feel comfortable going back into the workplace and your employer will permit it, that you should ask.
Okay. I have 3 questions that kind of are all talking about the same thing here. So is the landlord responsible for the safety of the air quality and the filters before the tenants re-enter? And what about places that the windows don't open? Is the air quality okay for the places that the windows won't even open? Is that safe?
Well, that's a very good question, and I will answer it as best as I can, not being an engineer. I will tell you that it's probably wise to find out what kind of system you have and what the current filtration system is. You know, in most of our buildings, we have a MERV 10 filters or higher. A MERV 14 is recommended post-COVID. People will talk about HEPA filters all the time, but HEPA filters are really for hospitals, and they remove 99% of the microbes. The more important thing, and Dr. Handler spoke about this last week, is making sure that the amount of outside air coming into your system is coming in at least once an hour, up to 4 times an hour. But that also presents other challenges too, because if you do that on an 85-degree day, you're going to be bringing in outside humid air, and then you're going to, you know, encounter the bane of all property managers' existences is hot and cold complaints. So you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. But I think that's a very good question. I know for SJP Properties, we have changed all of the filters in the last 3 months in every one of our buildings, because we knew that question was going to be asked. So if you normally change them quarterly, landlords may increase the amount of frequency.
Okay. How are you keeping folks from entering the building if they have not completed the wellness check?
We ask them, well, if they come in and they were cited on the list of, somebody at our front desk has the list of everybody. So let me back up. The portal opens at 3 in the morning and it ends at like 10 in the morning. So we have general contractors and construction workers that may, you know, come into the office or leave their home as early as 3 in the morning. So we wanted to give them the opportunity to be able to complete it. So the foreman or whoever's in charge of checking that list will see if your name is on that list and you've checked in. And if you haven't checked in, you're asked to leave, or you have to check in right there and you have to take the test, you know, and everybody was given, in our instance, everybody was given a thermometer. So you have the opportunity to self-administer a temperature test. Some companies are doing it for you. You know, you've heard of thermal imaging. Some people are having these thermal imaging systems put in, and you're walking in, you're standing in front of it, you're being tested, and it's either letting you in or you're being rejected, and then waiting 10 minutes, taking it again, and then possibly being sent home or speaking to somebody in HR.
On the same lines of that, I think you just mentioned it. What's the app that you're using for your employee screening?
Ours, I can't give you ours because ours was a custom app that was developed by our own IT team, but I know the CDC has one posted on their website, which I do refer to here in my presentation. That is, I think it's on the Apple website. I'm not sure if Android has one out as well, but there are other options available online. You would Google CDC COVID Well Check app or Health and Wellness app.
And are you using the app you're using? Are you using it to screen visitors? And if not, how are you screening them differently than employees?
Our own visitors, SJP Properties visitors, will get a form when they enter, and then that form will ask the same questions. However, we will not be administering or taking temperatures of people who are not SJP employees. Okay. Now, tenants have their own restrictions. We can't test or reject or refuse our tenants' guests. And in most cases, we're going to defer to the tenant. So if somebody enters the building, they're a guest and they're visiting, let's say, Ernst & Young, they go to the security officer, they walk up to the plexiglass sneeze shield, they give their name saying they're here to meet so-and-so. The security officer will be there to remind them, oh, I'm sorry, sir, you're not wearing a mask. Ernst & Young only allows visitors who are wearing masks. And they're like, well, I'm meeting with executive so-and-so. I want to go up there anyway. Well, then it was our obligation to call that executive, have them come down with a mask for their guests and escort them upstairs. We won't let them pass the turnstiles.
Okay. The owner of our 10-person marketing agency will not be requiring masks. What is legally required as opposed to what is choice? I know you're not a lawyer.
I'm not an attorney. That's my disclaimer. I am not an attorney. I am a commercial real estate executive. And it is not a law to wear a mask. It is a recommendation. It is a recommendation by Governor Murphy, and it is also a recommendation in New York. So if somebody is not wearing a mask and you feel that they're in your 6-foot space, then I would think as an employee, you have every right to question that. But again, you may have plenty of room in your space, right? I mean, think about it. Real estate has become so dense the last 10 years. You know, people were cramming extra people into spaces. And now it's almost like we're going to go back to the late 80s and early 90s where everybody's going to have individual offices again because you'll have the space. You'll have the 6-foot radius around you.
Okay, next one. Responsible parties must ensure distancing rules are adhered to by using signage, occupied markers, and other methods to reduce restroom capacity where feasible. who are responsible parties?
Who's responsible for reducing density in the restroom?
Ensure distancing rules are adhered to by the
There's
sign.
it's my understanding there's no COVID police, right? So again, we're going back to allowing the adults to be the adults that they are. If you feel comfortable entering a bathroom that looks like there's too many feet underneath the stall doors, I would recommend against entering that bathroom. There is not going to be somebody there in our buildings monitoring that. So, and I don't think many landlords or building owners are going to have somebody monitoring that. That's why the signage is so important, to remind people, practice social distancing, stay 6 feet apart when you can, wear your face coverings, and wash your hands.
What if your building does not accommodate outside air coming in?
That I can't answer for you. I could find out from one of my engineers your best possible recommendation, but I would think that most systems now, or at least within the last 20 years, were developed to bring in a measure of outside air. I think it's a requirement. I think you can't get your building inspection certificate unless that's the case now. So,
Okay.
but that's a good question. Sorry, I can't answer it.
Okay. How do you go about making a well check app?
I would speak to your IT or your whoever handles the technology in your office. There are web developers out there, and it's not expensive. I can tell you, we did it, and we did it in 5 days.
Okay. Do I have any other questions from the audience? Let me just check.
While you're checking, I can talk to the fact that, you know, the New Jersey website has so much information on it. There's also the One New Jersey Pledge, which was just announced, I think, about 10 days ago by Governor Murphy. And that is encouraging and recommending that all companies in New Jersey post the One New Jersey Pledge poster in your workspace to let people know that you are practicing all of the things we talked about here today: face coverings, social distancing, excellent hygiene, washing your hands, etc. And again, you can find that on the New Jersey website, and all of that you can download and print out and laminate and hang up in your offices.
Okay. Is there anything else that you wanted to chat about? We have a few more minutes. I don't see any other questions right yet.
I think I would like to know from your audience at large, you know, who has already placed their order for the PPE? You know, one of the longest lead time items that we found was PPE, or electrostatic sprayers to do disinfecting for our janitorial teams. Getting in the disinfectant stations that will distribute the Purell into your hands. Those are coming from China in most instances. So people don't realize the lead time on some of this and may not have even begun to plan for their employees to return.
I did get a question. I guess they're asking about a temperature scanner recommendation so that we don't have to man it.
A temperature, well, that's the problem though, because, and again, I'm not an attorney, but having somebody come through your thermal imaging system will require somebody there, and it should be a third party, whether it's a security officer or a nurse or somebody from your HR department. I would think that it's going to be very important to have somebody there in the event that somebody refuses to take it.
Okay. Anybody else?
I think it'll be interesting to see what happens as a part of reopening. You know, again, I was in Hoboken today. The waterfront was milling with people. People were out at the restaurants that are open, that have outdoor seating. It was exciting to see people getting back to a measure of normalcy. And again, you know, people walking and in motion were all wearing face masks, and people who were seated and comfortable with the people in their, you know, immediate surroundings were not wearing masks.
Okay. I do have two more questions. So one I forgot from earlier, I was saving it. They can't wait to get out and they want to know what restaurant you went to.
Well, if you're in Hunterdon County, I went to Dora's restaurant on Main Street in Clinton last night, and it was absolutely fabulous. I can tell you in Hoboken today, Del Frisco's was open, the steakhouse, Wicked Wolf was open, GFG Bakery was open, the Thai restaurant was open on River Street. I know that there's lots of restaurants open in Morristown and Sussex County and Warren County. So there's plenty of places to go. I think it's a measure of who has outdoor seating and who doesn't. But I know in our town, the mayor has permitted people who don't normally have outdoor seating to put outdoor seating temporarily in parking spaces. So we have a diner that's on the old 24 that had 8 tables set up out in 4 parking spaces. They were all socially distanced with umbrellas, and it was really nice to see that the town was taking that into consideration to try to boost retail and to boost foot traffic in the town again. So I think that's a great question.
I've seen that too.
I'm sure everybody's going to be going out to dinner over the next 3 days.
You won't be able to park there because of all the we're having a huge problem of finding gloves. We are a food handling facility. Any recommendations?
I can find out where we obtained our gloves and send that out. But yes, gloves did have a long lead time. You know, the WB Masons of the world, the Home Depots of the world, Home Depot Pro. If you've already looked at your restaurant vendors, right? Have you gone to like Restaurant Corner, Chef's Corner? A lot of those companies have them as well. And then some more obscure places like, you know, I know Newmark Knight Frank is a brokerage firm and a third-party management agency, and they provide that to their tenants. And then you can also find it from Regency Lighting. That's another vendor who had access to a lot of PPE, who purchased it up front for their clients.
Okay. Should we have employees sign an oath of compliance to the rules set forth to protect their safety and the safety of coworkers?
That's a very good idea. And again, I would speak to your HR or labor attorney. I think that is sort of what we're doing with our Well Check and Health and Wellness app, is having the employees take part and voluntarily agree to follow these guidelines. I think it's a great idea. But whether it's legal or not, I can't speak to that.
Disclaimer.
Yeah, disclaimer.
This is not a question, but a comment to follow up on the HVAC item. It may be worth letting the group know that ASHRAE I'm sorry, I didn't know that. Has issued a position document on infectious aerosols, and this document provided guidance on how to modify the HVAC system.
That's great. And yes, ASHRAE is a great resource for people. So share that website with your engineers. They have a lot of white papers out there, and many that were released during this pandemic. So those are great questions.
I'll wait another 30 seconds. Anybody else?
Well, I mean, I can speak more, I could speak more about the tenants that we have in our portfolio. Again, we have some tenants who are coming back into the building on the 22nd, some who were shirting for July 13th, hoping that that's when we were going to be in stage 3. But then again, we don't know when stage 3 is going to start. Other tenants who don't even want to be bothered, some of the larger tenants, some of the international tenants who kind of have locations in Europe and Asia, who kind of saw it firsthand as it was hitting over there. Some of them are delaying the return of their tenants until after September or even January 2021.
Okay.
It'll be interesting to see how this happens. And we all have heard the news about Facebook, Twitter, Google, Dell, all of those companies are going to have a work from home policy through 2020, through the end of 2020. Some of them aren't even going to make a decision on returning until after Labor Day. Okay. So with all the small businesses that are here listening today, it'll be interesting to know what you're thinking of and how you plan to come back into your workplace. Are your buildings ready? I know most of the larger landlords out there are prepared and ready and willing to welcome everybody back. Again, as I said before, all of our buildings have been open the entire time. So.
8-ounce bottles of hand sanitizer. We would like to have one for each employee for reopening. Everyone is out of stock. Any ideas?
That's interesting. I don't know what brand you're looking for. We have purchased every brand, from Purell to Germex to no-name brand at Target. I've found that we were able to get the antibacterial dispensers from everybody but Purell. So I will look to find out where we most recently purchased them from. Again, we stockpiled a lot of this earlier in April. We got our delivery in April along with our gloves, but there's so many different brands out there that are available. So if you're only looking for Purell and you only are using your company's, account with WB Mason or with Home Depot, you're going to run into challenges. In some instances, we actually walked into Costco and bought it, or I would be traveling and I would see them in a Target or a Walmart and I would pick them up for the team. And then again, we had a lot of luck with Home Depot Pro and some of the restaurant providers out there.
Okay. Our offices that are non-essential phase, our offices that are non-essential phase 3 or 4.
Non-essential is 4. Stage 3 is, and if I recall, and I'll click back up just to make sure, but stage 3 is critical in-office work. So essential employees only. I think most people need to be careful in how they invite people back into the workplace. And I have this page up here. I don't know, can you see? Am I sharing my screen still?
Yes.
At the end, I have a bunch of websites which will direct you to all the information that I spoke about earlier, some better than others. And I believe you should be able to find a list of providers of disinfectant on the cdc.gov website as well. So, and I can easily share any other links with people who inbox you outside of this webinar.
Okay. Did you have any issues with employees being unable to get the app for screening?
We had 1 or 2 people who had a phone that couldn't get the app. That's a very good question. And so what we did is we had them do a hard copy printout of the well check form, and then they complete it and then hand it to their supervisor every day as they walk in.
This looks like a comment. Besides our production folks, we are opening our conference room for essential meetings only in September and haven't decided about the rest yet.
Yeah, we have several buildings that have communal common areas, conference centers, and meeting space. And we have taken the opportunity to remove 50% of the chairs in all of those spaces. So I think what we're going to find as people come back into the workplace is you're going to have teams that might have already seen each other over the last 3 months, people who are comfortable working together, who are comfortable not wearing a mask in front of, who are not going to have an issue going into the conference room and speaking in a closed, confined environment. And for those that do, then your employer will make accommodations for you, whether you Zoom into that meeting or do it remotely or wear a mask, or, every company is going to be different.
Okay.
Great.
Well, thank you, Tina. Thanks again for all that great information. Don't forget, all of you will be receiving a recording of today's webinar and the PowerPoint slides via email. Lastly, when you close out of the webinar, a survey will come up on your screen that we hope you'll fill out so we know and can best provide you with more important information in webinar format. Our next webinar is our Healthy Business Certification course, which will take place every Tuesday starting on June 23rd, and it will run from 9 to 12. So feel free to register for that one on our website, njbia.org/webinars. After certification, you will receive a certificate to hang in your business and a decal as well. There is a cost to that course, and the certification is good for a year. And by all means, check out Domain Computer Services for all your IT needs at go-domain.com. So until next time, for Tina Hunthy of SJP Properties, this is Lisa Begatner thanking you for being with us this afternoon and wishing you a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.